should a young healthcare company care about protecting their innovation? So go to the next slide. Yes. Right. Free food in the back. But why do we care about this? Again, healthcare company again. Well, healthcare companies have special attributes. There are software companies that have their type of attributes, healthcare companies. And I'm generalizing healthcare companies because healthcare can be medical device, can be drugs, can be services, etc. But so some of the things may not apply perfectly. But oftentimes they have long development times, high margins, big markets, means and high demand, and a lot of, putting green, large profits if they're successful. There are a lot of flops, of course, but there's a good potential for large profits. I know a lot of people must be smart to say, oh, maybe not in my case already. But that's one of the big benefits. So we want to have barriers to entry. If somebody's going to think about investing in your company or getting involved in your company, which I'll talk about later, you want to have some barriers. So what are some of the barriers? Well, a lot of these have long and expensive R&D cycles. It takes a long time to develop this stuff. Also, there's often regulatory with FDA and different countries outside of the U.S. European has their requirements, and often requires very specialized expertise. Take a lot of times you PhD in this, teams of these people who are very specialized and focused. And it's not just something some 19-year-old kid in their garage is going to whip up, like Steve Jobs. These guys are dumb. So if that's all you have, here's my very strong statement. Exception to almost everything I say, by the way, but you're likely not going to achieve those goals in this field. Why? Of course I'm going to say this, right? You're a patent lawyer. You have to protect your innovation. You spend millions of dollars developing it. You got to spend a few $1,000s protecting it with patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets. And I could spend an hour talking about those and not even brush the surface. But the main thing I really mean is that is usually most valuable are the patents and the trade secrets, because the patents are a document or a legal instrument that gives you the right to stop other people from making, using, or selling your technology. It doesn't necessarily give you a license to sell it, by the way. Just because you have a patent doesn't mean you can sell it. And trade secrets are important because if something can be kept secret inside your company, you can go on indefinitely. And hopefully no one can reverse engineer because you have those other earlier barriers to entry that I mentioned. Long R&D cycles, cost a lot of money to get to. Actually, I didn't even put that as a barrier to entry. It costs a lot of money to do all that. So, why do you want to do it? It's all about market share. That's my theme. You want to develop this arsenal of offensive weapons, like I said before. So if your market is this table, think of a Venn diagram. Someone stays outside, you're okay. They come in, you pull out your guns and shoot at them. Stop them, and then hopefully that can, and hopefully it's strong protection, not something weak. The other barriers I mentioned earlier about the long R&D cycles, those are more defensive, in my opinion. I guess it could be occasionally made their offensive, but really, it's just defensive. You sit back and hope nobody can get into this space because it takes so much effort. So, we're clicking real well.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, it's actually a full process. You have to first develop the offensive side. You have to develop and manage a patent estate. I underline manage because a lot of people think, all right, you hire these patent owners, you pay them a lot of money, you get everything filed, and you're done. All set. But it's an ongoing process. And you need to have somebody own that process inside the company. Oftentimes it's the CEO on a really tiny company. As it expands out, it might be the CTO or some VP of engineering as you get bigger. But somebody has to own the process and be responsible for pruning the portfolio, trying to protect new innovation, thinking about new innovation, and working with your outside counsel to get that estate larger. You also need to maintain other effective IP processes, like you're going to license. I can't tell you how many times I hear companies that want investment from some of the angel groups, my angel groups I'm in, and they've licensed IP from MIT or BU or Yale or wherever, some big R&D institution, And you need to keep track of that. You need to figure out how to, is an exclusive license or non-exclusive? Is it just an option? And of course, you need to maintain processes for make sure your agreements with third parties and employees are right. One huge problem everyone makes is they hire these employees, they say high five, and come on in, and there's no agreement to assign all the inventions or innovations, trade secrets, everything to the company. And that can be a big problem, especially when you're going into diligence. And of course, there's NDAs, trade secrets. One time with a big, very mature company, we had a joint development agreement with another company. And we sat down and didn't have a great joint development agreement. And they went off and patented what we invented. And it was a big fight, cost millions of dollars to solve, literally. Make sure you have those when you get to work with somebody, you have things nailed down. Easy for me to sit here and say that. In the real world, though, you have to do business. So you have to mediate, that need to have everything nailed down to being able to do business. And the next step is make sure, this is the flip side of it, make sure your company can sell the product. That's the other half. I don't know, all I've been talking about so far was building up this arsenal. Remember, you have a Venn diagram, someone steps on your property, bang, you shoot them down, they fall down. That's stopping other people, but like I said, I can't tell you how many times people, I raise my question in a meeting and I say, have you conducted any free operate? Can you sell the product? They say, oh, we have 5 patents in this space. And okay, so say you're selling a drug, right? You have 5, you can have 1,000 patents. Doesn't mean you can sell it. The FDA doesn't let you. There's regulatory, and there's also another reason. Somebody else might have a patent that stops you. So if you have the patent for aspirin, obviously no one's going to have it. You have a patent for aspirin. If somebody else develops a really much more effective way of administering aspirin, or a much better dosage, or whatever, composition of aspirin, you can sell that much better composition because you still need to get the rights to sell it from that basic patent relating to aspirin. And they similarly can't sell your special dose, assuming you have the patent. So you've got to make sure your company is not infringing somebody else's patent. Who might those be? Most of the time it's competitors, but you have to watch out for universities. Non-practicing entities, which are companies that just buy patents and assert them against people for money, and individual inventors. In fact, doctors, what does green mean?
8 minutes.
Oh, so I got 2 minutes.
8, 10, and 12. You have 4.
Oh, I have 4 minutes, okay. The most important part's at the end. This is all background, I'm sorry. The individual investors, doctors are the most common individual inventors who make money off of their inventions. And that's pretty widely known on the patent. So, who cares about this? Now we're getting to more of the interesting stuff. You care about it. Why? Because at least these people, and these are just people that came to my head, investors are going to care about it a lot. If they're investing, they're going to think, okay, what are the barriers to entry? And some companies, the barrier, like I was talking earlier with a couple people here, we were saying, if you have a social media play, maybe it's not so important. And if it's very software focused, maybe it's not as important. But if you have a device or a drug, it can be critical to the company, especially in these highly litigious spaces where you have Boston Scientific suing Bard and artists, everybody's suing each other. You got to make sure you're in the right space, because the investors are going to think about what the next people on the list are thinking, potential acquirers. That's really the end game. Or if it's an IPO, an analyst is thinking. Or follow-on investors. Also, future talent, potential hires. Savvy people want to come in. If they see the company has no protection, what good are their options? Maybe they may think they're not worth as much. Competitors are important. Sometimes that can change their behavior. They see you have a good patent position, they may steer around it and make an inferior product. You don't necessarily have to sue a person to have your patents be valuable. Development partners, again, they know you're protecting your IP. You can prevent this problem that I mentioned with my client, where the other company went off and patented something. And of course, customers. You're a small company, and you're signed a deal with Baxter, and to sell some kind of medical valve. They're going to want to know that there's good IP to protect that technology. If if they think they're going to sell, they're spending a lot of money to get into business with you. They want to make sure they have some exclusivity. And I see that happening a lot in the space. And they know you as a small company aren't going to have the money to indemnify them if they get sued. They know that. So, but still, they want to have that security that in case something happens, they're taken care of. So, next slide, I think. So, the big problem is if you have poor IP practice, it can kill an acquisition or a finance. I can't tell you how many times we hear that there's a demand letter that came into a company. Now the investors get scared. And they think, I don't want to buy a lawsuit. That means we're going to have to spend $200,000, $500,000, $1 million, whatever. And then the entrepreneur says, no, this is something, we're not infringing, we're okay. Our lawyer said we're okay. It's just one extra thing that can really sour a deal. And so if you do your diligence up front, you should be in hopefully in good shape. Thanks a lot. Do we have questions now? Oh.
Most of the things you talked about are, if you're talking healthcare, they talk about devices. How do you protect software? And what's that?
And digital.
How do you protect software? Let me tell the answer every patent lawyer should say. I don't know. I'm being a little bit hyperbole there, but in July, the Supreme Court threw a huge monkey wrench into the software world on whether you can protect your software. And nobody, Alice versus CLS. And it's been the biggest, I've been doing this 23 years, it's been created the biggest ripple effect of patents being wholesale, killed, shot down. And people ask me, well, what do I do about this? How do I protect my, is my invention patentable? And if it's really software-based. Well, there are a few little guideposts that you can grab onto and say, yes, it is. But most of the time, it's not a straightforward decision because we need to let the courts sort through the issues and get some more case law, some more experience, and hopefully it'll sort itself out. One of my partners is actually working with a senator to try to get a legislative solution to this, because right now it's very confusing, it's created a lot of uncertainty, and it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And the Supreme Court doesn't know much about patents. It's the Federal Circuit, which is the lower court. They're experts. Anyway, that's my editorial. So, how do you protect software? It's a case-by-case decision. Don't think you can even think about figuring out whether it's, if you need to make your judgment with the expert, a patent lawyer who has at least a better shot at understanding information. I'm sorry to say.
Because investors, when you have a software or a digital healthcare IT solution, they don't look at what you have.
Yeah.
What they look at is what market share you have, how much revenues you have. Based on that, they make investments, not on what you have protectable assets.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, also, software oftentimes has a short lifespan, so you want to make sure that if you do protect it with IP, with patents, it's protectable with a broader concept that's going to last more than a couple of years to have the investors happy. But yeah, the closer you get to software, the less, this is super general, I'm sorry, but the less important that the IP is patented. But again, different investors have different opinions on that. So I've said that, and I've had investors scream at me both ways, telling me I'm wrong in both directions. So.
Thank you.
Sure, good question. Very timely. Yes?
Years ago, I used to work for Ag Laboratories, and they bought TheraSense, and it actually came down to a bad patent. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that case. Went to the Supreme Court twice, millions of dollars spent. And I'm wondering who messed up on the due diligence. Because once the acquisition happened, these properties would bear. But I don't know if you could comment on that.
Was that about 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 2005. And then could you just also comment about the NDAs? Because California is the only state without the NDAs. And I know there's been some push in the legislators to get rid of NDAs. But as the slides show, it is a valuable component of.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's better than nothing. The best thing is to have a patent application. Starting with that, your last question. It's better to have an NDA than not have one. Investors often won't sign them anyway.
Yeah.
So but if you're working with a partner or a
Employees.
employee, yeah, you should certainly have, and I didn't realize California had no NDA law. I know they have a no
Oh,
non-compete.
see, I'm sorry, that's what I meant.
Oh, you meant non-compete?
Yeah.
I think, I'm a member of the Mass High Tech Council, and we're actually, that's an agenda item we're gonna take up with the State House.
What do you think about that?
Oh, should I talk politics? But, okay. My personal opinion is, I really don't like non-competes. I think it's not fair to the engineers and the employees who are desperate to get a job, and they'll sign anything, for 90% of the rank and file. And they have, if someone steals your trade secrets, then you can go after them for trade secret theft instead, and that should protect you. That's my simplified interpretation. So but NDAs you should certainly make part of your repertoire, and you can get, they're pretty easy, very straightforward. Hope that answers your question. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't offend anybody with it.
So, as an engineer who has been backed into kind of signing non-competes or not
Yes.
being able to work on a project, what authority do we have to say no and still get the job, or do we not really have any?
I don't think you have the leverage. That's why I think they're not a good thing. Now, if you work, my understanding is if you work for a California company, they can't have you sign a non-compete, even if you're in Massachusetts. So if you work, for Qualcomm, people work there.
Microsoft.
But I think if they do business, they can't. I know people at Qualcomm who didn't have to sign them. Yeah, so.
Can a company have a non-compete for their employees and consultants, or do they have to be the same?
I guess they can do whatever they want. I'm not,
I can answer that one. The answer is yes, they can. And I think that, on non-competes, anybody with 5% or more of the stock should sign it. And if you don't have it, it's around 9%. You shouldn't, but I mean, there are reasons
yeah,
for it,
sure.
but generally not.
Maybe they could carve out some exceptions like that. I just feel bad for the rank and file. People say, oh, I'm working here, I can't get a job. They're really locked in. There are no non-competes in the law business, by the way. Lawyers can't sign them, it's against the law. And so, and I think it's good, it's a good thing. I don't like when a lawyer who works for me leaves because, I wish I had a non-compete, but in that case, because I'm selfish. But normally though, I think it's not, I think generally.
I have two questions.
Yes.
It's so difficult if you have a healthcare biotech business
Yeah.
to develop a research model like a mice with special genes and the plasmids, but there's no way to file a patent on a research model. Why is that?
Oh, well.
And the NIH doesn't like it, but it's so hard to construct these things.
My brother-in-law's a scientist at Jackson Labs. I wish you were here. I don't think I can answer that question because biotech, wet science isn't my specialty, so I never get into that. So I unfortunately can't.
All right,
So you stopped me, I'm sorry.
Oh, my second question is like surgeons,
Yeah.
if it's they put wavelengths together and then they use some algorithms which is kind of math and IT, and they come up with this data,
Yeah.
but you can't patent that, right?
Well, there are ways you can patent. You can't patent data, great, per se, but there are tricks you can use to try to protect it secondarily. And that's part of what the Atlas versus CLS case is trying to stop. And so we're trying to figure out how to deal with it.
I think we could have an algorithm that we can copyright it, or use the code.
Yeah. Yeah, you can copyright, but all the copyright does is it stops from actually looking at it and copying it. Whereas, and that has value. For example, if somebody's directly on the UI, yes. However, it doesn't stop the broader market very well if somebody independently develops it. But it's better than nothing, I agree. So, yes.
I have a question. So, and this is interesting for my physician colleagues, but you had this slide on there that doctors and families. And I think what's really interesting, or if you can comment, is as particularly with all the hospitals in our area, if a physician is working for a large medical center, there's a lot of IP that's owned by the hospital. And are you seeing in any direction? When you invent something, what part you own versus what part of the hospital? And I think it's a really interesting question because I think a lot of physicians don't even know that this talk.
Well, most of these hospitals have their own tech licensing offices.
Right.
And they're basically like the universities are the same way. So they have a lot of incentive to see their doctors succeed a lot of times in new innovation. But they like to have their pound of flesh. And so I really haven't seen too many warm and fuzzy. I mean, they do work together, and oftentimes it's very positive. But they're not, you're working in a hospital using their labs, and their employee of theirs, you're automatically
Yeah, I think,
developing.
and that what's interesting is recently there's been a lot of lawsuits, even if we're not working in the labs, that you develop.
Well, in general, if you're hired to invent, I don't know if doctors are, if you're hired to do research and invent and develop technology, no drinking drug cream or not, the company that hired you to develop this technology. Even if you do it outside at night, weekends, it's related. If you're a doctor going to develop, a book opener, then they don't know. But if you develop a new stent or whatnot, it has nothing to do with what you do. So I'm not seeing them lightening up on that too much. They're fortunate as they do. Yes?
Can I come to you for expertise, advice if I work with a medical facility overseas? Let's see, for example, if I have a doctor who's here gave telemedicine consultation to an overseas patient, the malpractice the doctor has here not necessarily going to cover whatever the risk because it's a gray area, we call it gray area.
It's what?
We call it gray area
Oh,
because
yeah.
malpractice doesn't
Yeah.
cover the telemedicine.
Yeah, it's not like renting a car with your car.
Right. Do you have expertise for that?
I don't. I know nothing about that. I don't like to say what I don't know. Like, over, or am I okay?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just want to answer that
Happy to,
question
yeah.
quickly. I think if a doctor wants to practice in an overseas, they need to have a license over there as well, even though it's telemedicine.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But I guess every country, and this is the same in Panama, when someone ever asks, anytime anyone asks me a question about law overseas, I tell them I have to contact a lawyer in that country. Because every country is different. And in fact, I could think I know, like I know Europe, for example, gives you a certain time limit to file after you file in the US, and a patent. But I don't want to rely on my knowledge because I'm not keeping up with the day-to-day law. That could have changed last week, and I could tell my client, oh, you got another month, you got 31 months. It could have changed to 25 months for all I know, whatever. And I'm out of luck. So I always recommend whenever you have some legal issue outside of your country, or even outside your state sometimes, you really need to talk to someone local in that jurisdiction.
If a New York doctor does not have a license to practice in Massachusetts, they cannot provide telemedicine services from New
Oh,
York.
really? Yeah.
They need to have licenses for each and every state, so some doctors have multiple state licenses.
There's some reciprocity, I think, but not every state has reciprocity with every other one.
Yeah, that just goes back to every state has their own personality and their own laws. So I try not to tell people I'm an expert in law of Great Britain or whatnot. But I have a good idea. I know the issues and I'll spot them and get the experts. And fortunately, most law firms should have experts in those areas who specialize in state malpractice or patent law. They should have experts to answer those questions for them hours, not weeks and days. Any questions? All right. Thanks.
So next is Ty. Ty Danco is the director at Techstars. He's an inventor and entrepreneur. He founded e-secular lending and buy-side effects, and he has a blog. And Georgia is now.
But it's got me thoroughly depressed, Steve. Having a wife and son who already have their medical device patents, I've got some provisional software patents which are now just.
No. Lawyers are very conservative by nature. I think it's a CYA thing, we just have in our goals.
Hi, I'm at Techstars, and I used to have a blog which I kept up pretty well, but I've waded through 1,500 applications for 12 spots in the last 5 weeks or 6 weeks. I'm a little bit mind numb here, but what you're going to find out is all you guys undoubtedly are going to be much smarter, certainly in your specific area, and probably generically, than investors. Smart investors are always necessarily good investors. And so you have to sort of dumb it down for us. Speaking with Ayesha just before, and I was realizing that my 19-year-old daughter probably has much better sense of where health IT is going because she's a digital native. But dummies like me, you had to sort of put your company into terms that I can understand. And when I see 1,500, you're also going to do that in terms I can remember. So your sound bites are going to be key. But the old thing, which everybody makes fun of, saying, "Oh, it's like Uber for pets," or it's like that. Believe me, that's actually helpful. Some people get a nervous reaction, but okay. But the answer is we have to compartmentalize and think of things. I was speaking with someone here, Bill, and we're talking about sort of quotes, and the idea is there is no new idea under the sun, but it could be a new application. And what you find is a lot of the great advances in health tech certainly are borrowed from other verticals or other disciplines. So when you work for one silo, the government trying something else. And that's where I think this cross-interdisciplinary thing is what really helps advance the model. And speaking as an investor, I would love you guys to have the best thing to do to cure this or that. But don't try to come up with a new business model. Like, oh, I'm going to have people pay us in Bitcoins, which are going to be paid. Like, no, just do it the old way. Everybody likes Bitcoins. So anyway, so we think in categories, and let's go through some of the categories. And I'm going to say that these are the models you should be thinking about for health IT. How many of you guys know what this is? All right. So that's a company it's been out for like a month, and it's already worth about $100 million because it makes video conferencing easy. Just go out there, and I could be blasting this out to the room, and Twitter would tell people about it.
I was kind of confused why it's so popular because Google Hangouts on here is the same thing.
Far be it from me, whether it's fashion or whatever, but I found it incredibly easy to use. And the answer is they got virality, and most of it all became fashionable because a couple of opinion leaders in the investing market started using it, so it took off. But so Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, all these things, these are all great models, which we can now look and use them for healthcare. So, oh, that's where we go. Why did that go in place? Double up, okay. So let's first of all take marketplaces. When I think of marketplaces is, you want something, you get something. I'm a buyer, someone says a seller. You want a hotel room, or you want a place to stay? Airbnb. You want a car? There's Uber. So what would it be in healthcare? ZocDoc. You guys go to ZocDoc? Are you a doctor? Go to ZocDoc. Another one that came out of this area, women who I believe that there were Mass General and HNS, HBS, is CarePort Health. So you've got an outpatient. They're going out. How do they get served now? So my dad has a stroke. He's too ill to come home, but he's going to go out of the hospital. Where do we take him? The old way was just giving you a piece of paper and say, here's a list. Good luck. Figure it out. But this is just easy matchmaking. What insurance do they take? What's his condition? How far away are you? Are there beds? That's a classic IT problem. So CarePort Health is one of the Techstars. You know, you can do a variety of things, but these typically say I get a cut of the action. You're going to give me 5% of the fee or whatever. What's important about Marketplace? We gotta have good stuff. If I want a car, I want to know it's not, you know, that it runs. And whatever I need to get at it, and I need speed. So if it's good in quality, I mean, you have to have the hugest selection in the world, but I need it to work. LinkedIn and Facebook, well, these are networks. And they say the value of the network is, you know, sort of a square function. You guys know Doximity? Actually, when I think of Doximity, figure 1 is where now that goes out to any, I think anybody can see it. I'm not quite sure if you'll be a nurse or a student or like that. The rounds is someone that's physicians only, it's in Canada. But that's sort of getting out there. But the business model for these stuff is targeted ads. So you gotta, you know, make sure that if you're working networks, if you're doing a network, I don't know how many people actually pay money to join the association. It can happen, but that's sort of a harder model to go. Let's jump on a few more. Search. Well, we all know Google and discovery in the App Store. How about this is essentially a diagnostic category, right? You know, what's wrong with me? I got a cough. Dr. Coop is one. MedAdvisor is one example we're talking about. They, I think you guys may know the Mayo Clinic website. You go out there and you want to know whatever it shows you. Well, MedAdvisor is doing white label versions for like New York Presbyterian and other people. So they're doing these types of things. The Holy Grail is going to link them to your EHR, so now it can actually give you meaningful information, but for now people type in a dozen questions or something like that. How do these things get paid? Well, you know, that's again targeted ad, lead generation. You know, if you're searching on smoking, you're probably going to get an ad, you know, for Nicorettes or whatever it is. So one more example there. Record keeping and storage. This one is actually one of my favorite ones. How many know Mint? Somebody Mint? No, I mean, so Mint is doing your financial health, but you know what they've got? They don't know what. I mean, they're not managing your money. They look at your Vanguard account and your bank account and your Fidelity account, and all it's doing is connecting to APIs, which are the interfaces between all these other programs. So let's think of Epic. You know, Epic. I'm not exactly sure how Epic works for something like that, but it used to be. It used to be that the biggest problem my wife, the physician, had was like getting X-rays. You had to go out there and find a folder. And they got digital. Well, they sort of go in, but the software for the right, you know, for X-rays is different from the software for something else like that. Cal can give us, you know, chapter and verse on that one. So the idea of one ring to rule them all, one combined aggregator, that's really valuable, and it's really hard. And Mint did that on a beautiful, simple, easy interface. It wasn't, you know, mind-blowingly dense, but it kept the pieces together. Mint, you know, that's like I pay $12 a month or something like that, and that's the same thing for EHRs, I think, generally. You know, where do you need that? You need to be able to get your stuff. You got to be able to do it easily. The last thing you want is 15 buttons for a bad experience, and you need to have it, you know, work. Cloud computing. Okay. This is, I think, probably not anybody in this room, but we see a variety of companies saying, we're trying to go through orphan drugs and figure something out, or we're crunching through massive data sets to find the research papers which seem unrelated but really are 3 things away. This is, you know, a lot of machine learning, stuff like that. I'm going to stay away from this because I really don't know this field well, but I know it's hard. Publishing. Notice there was a Meerkat example. I don't see a whole lot of examples of this. Maybe, you know, journals. You have another one, Cal, you're thinking of?
Like Meerkat?
Oh, Meerkat is a publishing thing. Now that happens to be video, but you know, a medium is something where it's like a Twitter. It's like I want to put things out. I want to publish. That's self-publishing. Well, when you have
WeChat is a microblogging site.
okay.
It's kind of a combination of Twitter and a social media site.
Yeah.
Extremely popular in China.
Yeah. You know, I will tell you, you know, again, that's information that's pushing rather than pulling. You can subscribe things, but people are just saying, I'm going to set out to the world, whoever wants to get my broadcast. However, so all these things can go out. You know, you don't have to be friends on Twitter. You just have to follow on Twitter, and you can subscribe to PLOS Medicine or something like that. The problem there is it peer reviewed? Does it have, you know, I'm sorry, it doesn't have the impact factor of this journal or whatever. But I got no doubt. But here, what are they doing? They're getting the word out. So you want to publish your findings. You want to show your research like that. Now, the problem with a lot of the markets, where I was thinking like on the other one about networks, I thought CIRMA was a big bunch of crap. I don't know it very well, but it was just selling ads and selling information. People didn't know it. That should be put in jail as far as I can see. Doximity seems to be mostly like getting physicians some kickback money for doing some flaky studies. I'm not quite sure, but on publishing, that's ads generally. But if you see PLOS is like trying to charge both sides. That's a business model that I don't think can stand.
So, but what PLOS, you know, PLOS Medicine has done is it's democratized like access to medical.
I'm all for it. I'm just saying the business model
Yeah, the
is
business model is
suspect.
tough, and so all the major publishers are trying to address what you're saying, which is not just information push out, but push in. And so Wiley just invested like $500 million. Like, how can we literally?
Oh.
It'll be very interesting. It'll disrupt the publishing.
I think
environment.
I cannot imagine how New England journals can exist in 1 year, and they're doing a good job. So imagine if you want to work, why that's not, you read a research paper, and they quote, I want to go right to that original paper, no, I want to go right to that spot, no, I want to go right to that reference. Paper can't handle it. But, you know, the question just means, how can you make money effectively? Because the other thing is, information wants to be free. Can you charge behind these gates, and there's always other ways that people copy it? It's a tough one, but you know, investors are going to try to always see, is this sustainable? Maybe you can have different models, but I'm going to be, you know, again, don't try to necessarily innovate on the business model. There are sort of normal things. It could be subscription, it could be ads, it could be payments. But again, don't try to go out and do barter economy to try to get around international tax arbitrage. You know, keep it simple. Now the most overhyped, hardest for me to figure out angle on Amplify itself. The one I really hate is Withings. That's the scale. You step up on the scale and it tells your weight over Twitter. And it's supposed to shame you into eating a salad. I don't know. But when you look at quantified self, to me, the things, well, there's two things. These guys, you know, are you selling the razor or are you selling the razor blades? You know, are you selling hardware or you're selling something that gets replaced on and on? Runkeeper actually is free. But Fitbit and Withings, these guys are selling hardware. 23andMe is selling a service.
It's shut down.
What? Well, you know, there's the questions on where they, it's going in other countries besides the U.S. And there are other. Yeah, they well, yeah, well, anyway, they're not supposed to be giving advice or whatever it may be. I understand that they're getting the screws tightened. The thing about Ginger is Ginger.io was a company at MIT that was just on your phone, and it's raised like I don't know, 50 million or something like that from drug companies looking for mental issues. So, are you sleeping? Well, it knows if you're texting at 4 a.m. that you may not be sleeping. Are you still going your normal work back and forth to the office? No, you haven't moved out of your room for 5 days. Oh, maybe you're depressed. There are things that your phone can find out fast, and it's really cool. But what I'm going to say is, the ultimate tool is the thing where you do nothing. Whether you've got the chip implanted in your skin or something, I don't know. But the more you have to do, the less effective it is.
How is Ginger.io competing with Google?
Ginger is, I mean, the fact that Google has all this information as well. I think the answer is, how does anybody compete against a giant? More focus, smarter intelligence, like that. Google, well, Google Health it was Microsoft Live Vault or Health Vault, Google Health. I think the answer is the world is so big, Google's just not paying attention to this factor. But there's no reason every company in the world should be scared about those guys. When we look back at that original list of companies, who are they? Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, it's all the four horsemen. I didn't have Apple in there, but it's all the tech giants, and all the same things are where you're going to end up going. So this is going to be really wild stuff here. I'm looking for people to have, what's the codex on motion? So you're looking at back pain, or just general pain. Well, did I move this way or that way? Or, did I pee 7 times today or 14 times a day? Well, maybe, if you had it on your phone and hit a button, it would be easier to give information. There's all sorts of stuff that's going to come out of here, but we just sort of don't know. But what I do know is the value of the data. Do I really care what I weigh? That's like a small thing. The Ginger IO data, well, that's maybe interesting. Now we're getting into everything about my psyche, my travel, and that's why, again, Google is making a fortune understanding stuff. I think that's pretty much it. But again, to go back here, let's see, I made this morning, thousands of pictures of here, thousands of pictures. I'm going to try to make sense of all the stuff I see from you. But it's going to be something that makes sense to me. I like disruptive models, but it can be a disruptive model, a new way to do eye care. Planoptica is going to reduce the cost of optician cost, 10x. But I still understand you pay money and you get a prescription. It's got to be something that can be scalable. Maybe not at first, maybe originally you're translating something by hand, but you got to be scalable. It's got to be big ways better, not just half better. And then I like the idea, again, of this cross-disciplinary thing. Solve the problem, the rest takes care of itself. Any questions? No.
I just want to understand psychology in East Coast versus West Coast. Why do West Coast people focus on consumer-driven applications, and why is East Coast feeding on to large existing businesses here?
Because we're smart. I think you can make a case that both sides are overdone. There's no doubt there's an ecosystem, there's a social aspect on the West Coast if you're not doing, it's like everybody used to be a waiter. The waiters all were movie actors. Now everybody's doing a startup. Once, the people, and that happens better in Silicon Valley than itself. We happen to be better at health tech here, so maybe San Diego may try to do a thing or someplace else. But no, if you're in drugs, well, we're in the right square block, right here. I think it's just, it's also sort of, if you look at the investors, when a Facebook goes public and 1,000 millionaires spawn, they tend to invest in what they know. Well, East Coast has always been a more conservative, it goes down to even financing documents. As lawyers will tell you, East Coast is much more buttoned down. We won't do uncapped convertible notes. Other guys will do safe documents which have no debt status. I don't really worry about it. There's investors everywhere, and good entrepreneurs can always find something, but it's always a struggle. Again, I was 50-50. I had one win, one loss, and the one thing actually that's important, one of the lessons of my loss was I tried to do a massive, big enterprise scale, something I knew was better, and I could show was better, and I had a proven track record. I had the same team, and I had this really long sales cycle because I was trying to take over and replace all of the software existing and most of the traders. Well, it would have been better, but you can imagine the gatekeepers that went out there and the problems that I had. And I got, the California Public Employees Retirement System, the biggest, plan in the world. They're my first customers, great. But I couldn't get any more because no one had. There was always someone who wanted to say no, no, no. So if you're going after electronic health records, you're not gonna take down Epic all at once. No one's gonna shut down the hospital and move into this startup around that. But, I was saying, they might take a little bit. But Epic's got 500 problems, I can solve one, I can bolt it on, and I can make it seamless and riskless, and you take it off if you want. Oh, okay, got one, got two, got three, I got this.
Which is why the up-and-comers have API programs, so that all the little companies now can bolt onto them, they don't have to build that functionality, all scripts, next gen,
Right.
Athena.
And that's
They're
the,
buying competitiveness to Epic, basically, by enrolling the likes of people in this room to API onto their core platform.
and that's why the App Store is Apple's big thing, and that's why Facebook yesterday, F8, they're trying to compete with messaging service. I think there's all sorts of interesting stuff on, HIPAA compliant messaging and all, security, other things are fun.
You see thousands of pictures a year, not pictures, but
Munches.
pictures. Yes.
In a month.
In a month, it's unbelievable. How much value do you put in the 30-second elevator pitch?
More than I should, and I would love to be able to give a thing, but it's also, there are a couple of tells. I'm sure one of the tells I have is someone goes, oh, I got a patent on this and this and this. I said, you got a patent? Or did you file for it? Oh, well, it's pending. Okay, you just told me you're either BSing me or you don't know. A good entrepreneur will say, we've applied. They won't oversell things. They say that the CEO only has to do three things right. He has to make sure the fund doesn't run out of money. He has to hire good people and has to set direction. In all three of those, he has to be able to sell. And he has to be able to communicate. And so if the guy can't tell me and boil it down, what he does in a simple statement, his odds of being successful in any of those are low. So, yeah, that's right.
Yep. I'm not sure if you saw the announcement on Friday that Google is against the surgical robotics with J&J.
I didn't see it.
Yes, I wonder, well, they announced that, I guess, late Friday afternoon. So I'm wondering, where do you think they're going with that? And what kind of business model do you think they'll use?
It's beyond me. I mean, Google does things because they can, the self-driving car, I think it's because I actually believe at the very top, they want to make the world a better place. I got no doubt that, robotical surgery can make great advancements, but I can't begin to think of how, that's beyond my paper.
What is this? I can't understand the secret language investors use. So when I disclose my invention to an investor, I obviously don't want to rely on one investor. I go to a few,
Sure.
and I tell them what my invention is, but as much as I can reveal, right? But what is the secret code between investors that when one says no, a lot of them say no, until I meet somebody who doesn't know all those investors?
Right. The answer is we're all lemmings or sheep, and we all go out. And there's certain issues of, the first one fear is the fear of missing out. I don't really fear I'm going to miss out until someone says yes, and I'm like, oh, I want to go. So that's the classic one. And it's just human nature. But I think there's a few things. First off, investors never will sign NDAs. A good investor will never sign an NDA because they're always afraid of themselves of being sued. Some other jerk comes up and said, oh, well, that was my, no, it had nothing to do with you. Believe me, I see 1,000. I don't want the hassle. I'm not signing an NDA, so you have a reason to sue me. So no good investor will sign them. But unless you think that investor is actually going to go out there and form a lab. Now, there's other things called entrepreneurs in residence, which is a little bit shaky. Those are people who are trying to get good ideas and come up with the next company, and that might be a little tricky. But the other thing is, there is a feeling of a shop deal. A shop deal meaning like you've gone to everybody. So there's a method of how you need to approach people, and you have to think of a good strategy, and any good angel investor can sort of tell you about it. But you might want to just practice on some harmless angels who will know things first and get your pitch down, and then think very carefully that, is Third Rock or is it Blueprint Health or is it, which people do I want to go to as the right investor? And if it's no, they just go to everybody. Here, guys, it's on Angel List. Everybody come get me. that's the sense that it's not good. I never pitched an angel group because I knew there were only 2 guys in that room I wanted to talk to. So I would go to talk to those 2 people. Now I had an advantage because I'd done my homework. I knew of that entire 50 people, there were only 2 who I think would add value to me. So there's a whole series of, I'm going to just call it, strategy. It's like how to, it's like makeup. It's how to make yourself look best in the best way that, to attract the right reaction. And that's a whole different topic, but it's very typical. And generally, I can tell you it's a good sign. If people are interested, if you're going to be, if no one wants to talk to you, that's probably a good indicator. And if someone I trust and I like who doesn't talk to you, and there are 5 guys who don't talk to you, that's something. For example, if someone gives me, Ty, I got a great deal for you, you like it. Did you invest? Well, no. Well, then why is it so good for me? You invested? I'll look at it. It's not, again, it's a makes my time more efficient, and is a sorry to bum you all out on that.
You look at thousands of applications.
Only this 2 months. It's an annual cycle.
I know, but what are the top 3 things?
Someone said there are 5 things we talk about. It's team. This is now early stage investing. Team. Then number 2 is team. Number 3 is team. Number 4 is market. Number 5 is product. So again, you can have a wonderful product, but how does it get sold? So any one of you can have, I've got the correct, best possible answer. Do I think you can sell it? Do I think you can get the team, I'm saying the 3 things the CEO has to do, do I think you can actually hire good people to make it go? Do I think the company is sellable? That's very few ideas are unique. It's almost all about execution. So the earlier stage, the more it's on the people. The later the stage is more on the economics and the cost of, cost of acquisition or the lifetime value of this or that or other metrics. We can get into metrics, but that's where I was going back on the idea of how important is the elevator pitch. It's important because if the guy can't communicate, he can be brilliant. But it's like, would I fund a brilliant Chinese PhD for an American product if he's going to do it in the United States and he doesn't speak English? No. Maybe in China, but not in the US.
How much credence do you put into business model forecast?
0. I believe expenses, I don't believe revenue. There is something the question is, do you, first of all, anybody says, well, these are very conservative projections, I've never heard projection without the word conservative.
These are pie in the sky projections.
No, for example, if you're looking at expenses, and the guy hasn't put in anything for insurance or certain basic business functions, like okay, the guy's a newbie, maybe he can be coached out of it. But when someone goes, it's going from $1 million to $500 million to $3 billion, I write them off. But also, he says after 15 years, you can get up to $300,000 of gross profit. I believe you. It's not of interest. So there is sort of some comfort zone, but mostly it's just.
But yet you still demand.
I don't.
You don't demand revenue?
Well, you don't have any. Why would I demand it? I mean, it's like you gotta have. Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, is there any market?
No. That's you're being simple.
Yeah.
This is 5-time entrepreneur. Everybody wants, and that's the reason I posed the question.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't believe them. I don't believe the forecast.
I understand,
Yeah.
but you still, they
Only
want to
for-
see what you think as an individual that's starting a company, what you think you can grow your company to from a revenue and a profit perspective.
Sure. I want to know what your margins are. I want to know the size that you think you get in the market. That's fine. I don't trust that in year 2 is going to be 123.246%.
Well, nobody knows what year 2 is going to be.
Nobody knows what your 1 month is going to be. It's just so the more the track record, the more you can have credibility. A serial entrepreneur will have more credibility than a non-entrepreneur.
Just to follow on that, I mean, I think everyone knows the financial projections are completely hypothetical,
Right.
tons of things, but the first question I always get is, how much money do you need in the next year, and how much money do you need to break even?
That's
And
very
I'm like,
different.
if
But
the paper's not worth what it's written on, what?
No, I take a great exception. Absolutely, the burn rate is a crucial calculation, and it can also be done from zero revenue. I want to know, when you raise money, how much money should you raise? Well, the issue is, you should raise enough money to get you to the next milestone that can significantly grow your valuation with some extra time, because you never get it on time. Everything comes later and a higher cost than you think. So maybe you think I can build this prototype one in 1 year, so you need to raise 18 months worth of money to give yourself a cushion. So in that case, that's 18 months at the beginning of the year with no revenue. You got salary, you should be able to pay how much you're paying your salary, how many people you need, what are your other costs, until you're gonna get it done. You can get it done in a year, okay, and you give yourself a couple extra months, that is there. To break even is another issue. Any big growing business will not break even for years, because you want to have enough of a growth cycle that will be reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting. We're breaking even higher and higher, so to speak, the SaaS models of people looking. There's a lot of actual good science finally in management of the value of money, of cohorts and stuff like that. There's a lot of discounts that are too pie in the sky. But the burn rate, what every investor will ask you is, what are you going to do with this money? And what will you look like when it's gone? And then you should, on the same rate, be saying, because I'm going to do this, and it's going to get me to there. If I do that, I'm going to be raising then $5 million on a $20 million valuation. Are you in if I do this? What do you need for me to make money? Maybe the guy will say, oh, I only need to see this much, and I'll be happy to see you. Or no, I need that much. But before you take any money, you got to know one move ahead, so you know where the next round's going. Thank you very much.
Hi, Ayesha. So Ayesha is a board-certified ENT surgeon with 10 years of experience in healthcare. She recently completed an MBA at MIT, Sloan School of Management, in a fellows program. And Ayesha is a systems thinker and a health innovator enthusiast. I'll have you do that. Well, sure.
Awesome. So thanks for inviting me. I don't have all of the great wisdom to share as the past two speakers did, either legally or from a pitching standpoint. But I do have a lot to share around what the healthcare ecosystem looks like from somebody who came from inside the hospital and inside the physician space, and now really thinks about digital health and the space, both from the point of view as a patient's family member and also from the point of view of a business background. I'm going to tell you guys a little story. So to start, I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago at South by Southwest on digital healthcare. But right prior to that talk, both my mom and my dad had medical issues that led them to be in the hospital, and they went from being healthy to having to take daily medications. And it suddenly changed my perspective to be flying to Austin, while my mom was coming home from the hospital in New York, and thinking about, I really have no tools to tell whether her blood pressure is right, whether she's taken her medication today, the fact that I can't be there because I live in Boston and they live in New York. So when I got there, it was really interesting how very personal digital healthcare becomes when you start to have a family member that you want to take care of, and or yourself. So I'm going to talk about two things today. One, that the healthcare system is really complex, and how do we make sense of it. Thank you very much. That was perfect, actually. And the second, I'm going to give you guys a couple of examples of what I think from a physician and patient caregiver perspective are ideas that maybe are a start. They may not be the right answer, but they're certainly changing the way that we do business. So my systems thinking background comes from the fact that I think that we don't, it's funny because this is what Ty and I were talking about earlier, but when we train as like nurses, physicians, caregivers, we really train inside our own specialty. And the more narrowly I trained as an endoscopic skull-based sinus surgeon, I had about 100 friends that did exactly what I did, and we went to meetings for 15 years where we really talked about the stuff that we did that, let's be honest, no one else really thought about. What that does, though, is it really narrows our perspective. And so having taken some systems thinking classes, it suddenly becomes clear that a lot of the great innovations in med device, surgical technology, robotics, companies like Medtronic, come from the fact that if you take something in the field of cardiology and you apply it to the field of ENT, you end up with a $20 million company that J&J buys named Declarant. It's not a new idea, and I think one of the slides earlier sort of touched upon it. It's repurposing things that we do in one part of medicine to another part of medicine. But what I find we lack, and what I'm hoping that those of you in the room that have a business mindset or have engineering mindsets can really look at problems and say, oh, I saw a solution to this somewhere else inside Mass General, for example, and I can bring it to you and show you how to do that. Because those of us that execute healthcare, we often don't have the time to step out of our world and go do that. So next slide. So if we start to think about healthcare as a system, and we start to think about the fact that each of these are little units or areas, whether it's the emergency room, the operating room, the recovery area, what I'm really interested in, what I think digital health brings to us, is the interconnectedness or the arrows. So how you take a patient from like one place of care, whether it's in the hospital to their home. I think that, number one, is a huge business opportunity moving forward. And I think number two will really make us stop from having patients that are in the hospital who are then sent home, and there's really not much in between in terms of guidance and direction. Next slide. Thank you. So everybody knows that digital health is talked about, and everybody, I think, has approached it from the point of view that if we have something on our phone that can measure, that's faster, that's cheaper, that we can record, it'll be better for the patient, it'll be better for the doctor. Let me give you a classic example. So I saw patients this morning in the clinic, and I can't tell you how many parents come in with their smartphone and say, and I'm an ear, nose, and throat doctor, so in my realm, hey, here's a recording of my child snoring last night. I think it's gonna help you make the diagnosis. Let me play the 15 minutes or 20 minutes I recorded. Yes, you could record it. It was cheap. You could come in. You might ask me why bother doing a sleep study when I've already done some of this stuff, and they might even download an app. But the problem is I can't do anything with that data. There's no manageable way for me to interact with that while I'm in the office. So I don't think that digital health is necessarily just better, cheaper, faster. Next slide. I think one of the biggest issues we're having is trust. Both the patients have to trust it. Both the caregivers have to trust it, and I think what that really means is as we're iterating around med tech and digital health, we have to do it from, number one, the point of view of the workflow, or number two, completely disrupt the workflow. So earlier we were talking about pill pack, and if you think about it, everybody says, well, when I leave home from the hospital, I'm gonna get my prescriptions, I'm gonna take them to CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, any pharmacy, I'm gonna stand there, I'm gonna wonder why they took so long, because I didn't learn that, hey, if I take a long time, I'm gonna buy a bunch of crap I don't need while I'm waiting around, which is a great business proposition. They're gonna tell me one's not ready and I have to come back tomorrow, and I just have to accept that because that is the pharmacy experience. And I think what digital health offers is, well, why go to the pharmacy at all? So, you know, either you can, and I don't know, like, where folks like Ty that see a lot of pitches, like, where it falls with the right business model, but I think that unfortunately for those of us in healthcare, we really have a difficult time seeing outside the workflow we know. So it's really hard for us to imagine that you like don't have to go to the pharmacy at all. And I think that's where it's really interesting that, you know, Google and GE and Samsung are investing in a lot of these companies. Next slide. So I'm just gonna give you 3 quick examples, and then we can talk a little bit. There's tons that I could put up there, but if you think about the tools that we as doctors use, and I'll be honest, I haven't used a stethoscope, being an ear nose, in about 12 years. But most doctors use stethoscopes, and it's a tool that until recently hadn't been changed or iterated, and we firmly believed that it's the right way to go. But to be honest, unless you're a cardiologist or a really savvy internal medicine physician, you really don't have an idea on how to hear a heart murmur. It's a really difficult diagnosis. And the fact that we're relying on subjectivity and relying on noise control is really interesting. So now what can we do with a smartphone that can emulate and augment a stethoscope? Next slide. So one company, and believe me, and I'm sure for those of you guys that hear pitches, there's tons, but one company that's innovating the stethoscope is AlivePort. They're just taking this modular device that, you know, having seen it, I wish I brought it today, you know, you can put it up here and you can get an EKG reading. And what I saw this past weekend at this event at Yale is companies like Cigna are investing in this in their employees. And they're saying as part of our foray into like med tech and digital health, you'll be able to track yourself through all your vitals through these types of apps. Now that's interesting. I don't know what we could do with that. I guess you would still need like engineers to develop sensing algorithms that would tell you when there's an issue, but it's not the stethoscope, right? I mean, it just doesn't even look like a stethoscope. It doesn't feel like the same kind of product, and yet everyone in the world now has a smartphone. So just something to think about. Let's go to the next one. So the other one, which is in my world, my neck of the woods, is the otoscope. And how many of you have gone into the ER? Or more importantly, how many of you are a parent with a child who's had an ear infection? Is there anybody here with that? Okay. So like in this incredibly frustrating problem, the child is miserable. You're either going to the pediatrician, the ER, or an ENT, and we're looking in your ears. And most of the time, if the child is sick, they're pretty squirmy. Sometimes your pediatrician, have any of you been referred to an ENT of the three of you that? Yeah, so usually that happens when, you know, they're looking in and they're not sure, or it hasn't gotten better, or it's happened, and then you come to see me, and it's like this incredibly anticlimactic visit where I'm like, yep, that looks like an ear infection. You should probably get an antibiotic. Oh, by the way, we don't like to give antibiotics because it's eustachian tube dysfunction. And sometimes I wonder, and this happened today, it's kind of a waste of your time to have to come all the way here for me to sort of confirm what you, and I have 3 kids, so to sort of confirm what you know as a parent, which is my child's been really sick, better, right? So at the end of the day, what can we offer? Now we all live here in Boston in like the megapolis of healthcare, but like what if I live in a village in India where I really have to travel like 100 miles to get to a hospital where I can see an ENT specialist? Like how are we gonna democratize access for conditions that honestly we as surgeons don't necessarily need to or have to see in our office? Next slide. So there's 2 things I'll tell you about. One is a device that's already on the market, and it's called CellScope. And it basically what it does is it attaches, you can see it attaches what looks like the end of an otoscope to a cell phone. And it takes an image, which is pretty decent, that then you can mark as left or right and you can send off. So I think number 1, helpful. You can now take a picture of yourself or of her eardrum and send it off. I don't know that the picture's always as good as they're showing, depending on the anatomy. But number 2, this still requires access to somebody to look at the photo that has looked at eardrums before. So to me, I'm not sure that that solves the access problem, but it certainly solves the trip to the ER. Next slide. So what we're working on in the Media Lab for one of the projects that I'm doing is, but what if you took all of the component parts of an ear exam? So how many of you that have, how many of you have had a hearing test? Oh wow, a lot of you. Okay, so this device is part of the hearing test technology, a tympanometer. And this is the reading for any of you that have had an kind of indecipherable visit with an audiologist where they say things like, here's your right ear and here's your left ear and this is how many decibels you can hear in, which really, honestly, to anyone other than an ENT doesn't mean very much, like, can I hear better or not? But the reality is, what if you could take this, and the view of the eardrum, and you could make it all into a digital tool? And so that's what we're working on now. And the only way that I knew to work on this is some engineer asked me at a hackathon, hey, what if we could just use movement as spectral analysis to think about light and like whether it passes through or reflects back? And if it passes through, it means one thing for the opacity of the eardrum, and if it reflects back, it means something else. And could we categorize the eardrum as normal or not? And more importantly, could we categorize that movement or that insufflation that you guys have all sort of felt and say, ah, wonderful, now I'm sitting at home as a parent, I have this home held device with a red light, green light, and it tells you whether the eardrum is mobile or not. Now, it doesn't tell you what's wrong with it. It doesn't tell you if you need surgery. It doesn't tell you if there's earwax blocking the canal. But it does tell you maybe you don't have to worry and go to the ER. Maybe if your kid is crying, it isn't an ear infection, it's something else. So it starts to decrease the anxiety around the problem. I'm not saying we have the device with the red light, green light, but we do have an iteration of it that we're working on and patenting. We filed the provisional patent, and that's all I know.
Who's paying for it?
Who's paying for it?
The patent.
Well, it's out of the Media Lab, so it's through the very kind of obscure Media Lab licensing. Yeah, exactly. It's all secret. The interesting thing of working with universities is they tell you like not to worry and you don't have to know, but that kind of makes me worry. So we'll talk more about
The Media Lab being different than MIT.
the Media Lab being different than MIT. Yeah, I did learn that. Yes, that was one of my learning points earlier this year. Next slide. Okay, and this is, I have two more and then I'll end with this. But those are just a few examples. I can tell you that in the last 3 months, having gone to several med tech or digital health forums, JP Morgan had a big one at their conference. We're hosting one with Bio this summer, which is really interesting because it's biotech and pharma, and they want to get into digital health. And honestly, the organizers were like, we don't know what that means, so can you come and tell us a little bit about what that means? I don't know what that means either, but I can go back to the story of my parents and I can tell you that if you don't live with your family member and you have no way of knowing how they're doing, what sorts of devices can now start to make meaningful sense? Rather than just what I call endlessly measuring your vitals without an aim, when can they alarm you when there's an issue? So I think that would be important. This just represents the fact that I work a lot and help organize with MIT Hacking Medicine for our Grand Hack. So this is just honestly an ad for that. And don't worry, Ty, I will send you the slide.
Could we maybe put all of our slide decks going on the SlideShare or something?
Yes.
Yes, I'll put it on the website. Mike will put it on the website.
Yes, I can do that.
Perfect, next slide. So the last slide is really just a thank you to Cal, because I gave a TEDx in the fall, and he was the person I spent about 6 hours the day before practicing with, and basically that's why I'm here, because when Cal calls, I say yes, because it was a great event. And for those of you that are interested, there's a huge TEDx Boston Innovation Week thing coming up this fall, so I think Health Innovators is going to be a part of that, and it should be really interesting. That's all I have.
I understand that MIT teaches you how to get a system perspective. But I'm a little unfriended a little bit when people talk about system thinking in healthcare, because it's highly fragmented and it's so much regulated. You cannot look from a system perspective and say I'm going to solve the whole problem.
So I think that's true. Like, I think when I came in to MIT, I was very idealistic, and I think you knew that because we've talked about this all year. But you know, I really don't think that like Epic or the way the preoperative area flows at a big hospital works at all. But I think successful business building really takes a small part of that. And I think that's because a lot of people, let's be honest, are making a lot of money in healthcare the way it functions now, including hospitals, providers, payers. And so they're not interested in systemic overhaul. So really identify like one part and go after that. However, if you don't understand how the entire workflow is, like I see a lot of MIT technology that's really specific and they're pretty sure someone will need it. But the issue with that is like, how is it used in the context of how you see patients, for example? I think that's where the systemic perspective can really help. Yes?
Yes, I just want to comment. I've been involved in healthcare IT since before the turn of the century, and I would say that the
That's not something President
that was
would
the
want.
Good century day.
I was kidding.
But yeah, to your point, I would say that the capabilities of technology have evolved many orders of magnitude relative to their effectiveness and application. And I would argue overly simplistically through that 20+ years that you just touched briefly on one of them, is disintermediation within the system, meaning one, successful use of patient outcomes, there's winners and there's losers.
Right.
And secondly, with all due deference to technologists and scientists, there's the tendency to see things logically and expecting others that are key parts of the ecosystem to similarly see and operate, think logically. And one of the major failings in terms of accomplishing what you're looking at, and progress is being made, is the ineffective integration of understanding the behavioral piece on the part of patients, providers, and the payers, who sometimes are also providers or also patients. So I would argue that those, I'm not going to call it the social sciences piece of it, but the way our have not been brought enough in general into play in this whole.
I mean, I have to be honest with you, I'm an incredible cynic. I don't think the system works well at all. I have to say, I don't think the system works well at all. And I think beyond that, I think you're absolutely right. There's this obsession with better technology and better streamlining and better workflow in all the big hospitals here that still leads to the same miserable patient care that we sometimes provide. That doesn't take into account that when you're sick, what really matters to you is the fact that you're sick and how are you going to get better and what are you going to need to get there. I don't think most things I see, including initiatives at like I work at Mass General, I don't see them working. And I really don't think people understand the problem, because what it takes is for you to go through that experience as a patient. I think there's a great Time magazine article from the gentleman at Cleveland Clinic around cardiac care, and he didn't want to fund MRIs and CT scanners until he got sick and needed it, and suddenly it was like, well, of course. So, people behave irrationally, and they behave particularly irrationally when they're faced with illness or death. And for us to come along and say, don't worry, the workflow works, I would say a hospital is a very dangerous place to be without somebody watching your care for you when you're sick. I mean, that's how I feel, and what I'm hoping is digitizing some of that information and sort of democratizing access may help us piece it together better.
Well, and I would agree with you on that. Just one specific example, and I don't want to go too much in detail, but you mentioned remote care and the ability to better. There have been tremendous advances in the last 7 or 8 years. American Well is a local case in point where the VA has verified that 45% of interactions can be effectively carried out locally.
Right.
Not the 55% that have the biggest cost of health impact. But I'd argue compared to 5 years ago, it wasn't anything like that. So, and patients are more and more accepting the validity of remote interaction. But it is a gradual behavioral adaptation on the part of the patients. It's not going to happen overnight. But I don't know what I'm saying exactly, but there is hope for the future in the behavioral piece being integrated.
I also think we're at a crisis point in terms of cost. That it's less hope and more like we sort of need it now, and we're maybe everyone's in an payer hospital. Everyone's at this crisis where they might be willing to accept some different models. There's not crisis brings opportunity. Yes, and that made lots of hands go up.
I suffer from the biggest disjoint at all, and that is where I'm in, without getting into an explanation of what we do. It's in the front end of all of this, before you become a patient. Instead of being a patient-centered process, a person-centered process. So how do you, if you look at a typical ACO, there isn't an ACO in the country, I don't think, that's made more than a 5% cost decrease. And most of them haven't even got to a cost decrease. And so you look at that, and what they're really trying to do is fix the internal processes. And the most obvious thing is, when you have a capitated structure, the thing you have to do is, I'm being paid for in that capitated structure. And so your goal has to be, don't get me in the first place.
Yes.
All right? So that comes back to this whole area of 2 things, prevention and mitigation. Prevention being, I'd like to stop it before it starts, but in most cases that's not possible. So when it does start, let me mitigate the process outside of the hospital network, or even outside of the PCP or whatever, or aid the PCP. Right. But I'll tell you what, as a 5-time investor, the first time in the medical space, I feel like, and we're doing something that's never been done before, The definition of that is a missionary. The definition of a missionary is somebody with an arrow in the back. So changing the process is an extremely difficult thing to do for all the reasons you're saying.
And they have to be incremental. Right?
Yeah, but living through incremental is not easy,
No, it's
right?
not.
I mean, if incremental is months, it's okay. If incremental is 4 or 5 years, it becomes more difficult.
I agree, right.
So that's the huge disjoint.
So
And the same
funny
thing
that
is
you
true
guys
for us.
just agreed though, because what I heard you saying was like the incremental and the internal process might not, and he just said incremental and you said, yeah, I would argue that sometimes that is the problem, that everybody says it has to be incremental, but I feel like we're moving at a really slow pace. So, you know, in my heart, I'm a systems thinker and I'm all for, well, let's think over here. It doesn't mean everyone has to go here or the hospital has to join the startup, let's say, like when it comes to EMR. But I don't think ACOs, in my personal opinion, represent anything more than at least putting the issue on the table. But the actual model is pretty much a rehash of things that we've already tried to do, like in different parts.
Right.
But, you know, what is values-based care? I mean, a lot of people asked me that in November, and I said, I don't know. I thought all care was supposed to have value. Put that term on your startup, and you can raise money.
And when do you measure the value? At the conclusion of the treatment, or
Right.
6 months later, or a
Right,
year
or
later?
preventing the problem, right.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Well, I think that's where, when you start to look at measuring value along the full information life cycle, you have an opportunity to change. I mean, I would agree with you. ACO is slapping a new label on an old wine bottle. And where it's happening in an incumbent organization, but when you look at places that have had a chance to build from the ground up, like Ayesha Health, you know, they've been here literally within a block of here
Yeah.
for years. Rashika's been at this for a while, building up his organization. He's raised a lot of money. He's beginning to scale a model. You know, they just got a great write-up this past weekend in the New York Times. That's a ground up, so you can look at every step of that life cycle, where you can inject something into a new model where you can follow the money, follow the incentives, i.e. payers now working with new incentive models around care coordination, so you can have that person walking through your care. Then you can inject complexity managing vertical workflows is what we have done. It's like, okay, like put this out, put this new thing in, and you can fix that really well in that area. But the problem is I think everyone's looking at the big systems, and that's, you know, you're chipping away at an iceberg with a spoon. And so it's like, well, where do you pay attention? Do you pay attention to where people are kind of beginning to blow up the model and rebuild it, and some of the stuff that the payers are doing? Or do you look at the organizations that everybody's sort of innovating in what you would call superheated gas? There's a lot of buzzing around, but there's not a lot of movement forward. I mean, I'm interested in your perspective inside the partners on that. And you tell, I mean, we
I
chatted
now
about
work
this
for
before.
Bidco. I used to work for Partners.
Oh.
It's so awesome.
Bad.
Partners now the enemy, but it doesn't matter, yeah. I work at both, because I work at Mass Ioneer, so like one day I'm a Partners doctor, and the other day I'm a Bidco doctor. I work half time, and it's really funny how people think that it's really different on the other side of the universe. But the problems are the same. Like fundamentally, I've been to hospitals around the world, and when you walk into a hospital, like just walk in, you can pretty much map out similar things with the ER systems. To me, that is really interesting. I think there's a lot of business possibilities around the internal processes, but I don't know that there's the financial incentives yet.
It's starting from the ambulatory end.
Yeah.
That's where you prevent.
Yeah.
Right? The whole preventing rehospitalization, where they've already been in, now we want to keep them from coming back. Now, you can see it beginning to push that out into keep the incentives in the ambulatory state. That's the whole care coordination billing codes now.
Yeah.
You know, nudges in the right direction. You're plugging into that. Well, there's the other piece. I'm sorry, Ty's not here, but the other piece is the quote business model is where you straddle value-based reimbursement with the good old, got a nice 9 or 10 I can slap on it, bill. You know, and that's this whole.
I'm not even gonna touch billing. That's such a coding and billing is such a huge
Yeah, but
complex.
at the end of the day, if you have a workflow somewhere else, you hang it off that, so that someone knows how to actually put the body, who gets a paycheck doing it. That's right, somebody else figures out that piece, but you have to figure out where you fit.
Well, I quite agree with Mr. Go's concept of doing prevention and doing person-oriented health. And personally, I think if we want to shift from the physician-oriented to person-oriented, we really need to think about what people really need. For example, many people fear needles. Many people fear to see doctors. They procrastinate when they are healthy. They don't think about doctors. And they have issue of cost. All kinds of things are quite personal, and some of them care about their privacy. All these things are quite how to say, personal. So if we want to help them to get out of themselves and to protect themselves, it's very important to tackle these issues. That's what
Yeah, no,
I
fully
think is
agree.
also very important.
I think that there's a real hierarchy in medicine, just like there is in education, that teachers need it, doctor-patient. But I actually think it's interesting because I think in the U.S. we almost question things more when you go to a place like Japan or Brazil, and people don't even question a lot of what they're being told, right? So, I mean, those are deep cultural issues. The other side of that, though, is taking responsibility, and I bet you there's people in the room who would advocate for building companies, and the question becomes, if 80% of your costs are in your last year of life, and you know, I saw a patient recently who's spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in the healthcare system treating his laryngeal cancer and is a survivor, and he smokes 5 packs a day. So the question becomes, it'll be an interesting discussion in this country, and let alone the rest of the world, like what the accountability is.
It started. It's already, it's
Yeah,
already.
it's already started, yeah.
I'll tell you where it started first, and it's getting a faster adoption than you might think, and that's weight control.
Right.
There are companies now that are basically penalizing up to about 30% of the premium for a level of weight that's beyond it, whatever you want to call that level, whether it's called obesity or whatever you want to call it, or whatever level. And credits as high as 30% the other direction for good behaviors, right? And CVS, interestingly enough, is probably one of the largest companies in the United States that do that. And it's probably, and when you talk about places where things are changing and you look for development, take a hard look at CVS, because they have 900 clinics and they'll be at 1,500 in 2 more years. And the CEO of that company is a different kind of CEO than before. I'll tell you, when he goes to the point where he takes $2 billion worth of revenue out for not putting cigarettes out on the shelf anymore, you know he's serious about it. So you're going to see changes there. And a lot of the things that the PCP does today, the PCP doesn't really have to do. I happen to be in musculoskeletal space. The best person to see me coming in the door with my low back pain is probably not the PCP anyway. If the environment's large enough, it should be a therapist, a physical therapist, and or a well-educated nurse, and or a physician assistant. With the information we can give to people coming in the door now, and the skills of those individuals, we can begin to change that whole process. You don't really have to go to an MRI for 40% of the cases, or a CAT scan or whatever it happens to be. And so that whole front end of the process is going to change dramatically. And one of the reasons it's going to change dramatically is the insurance, the level that you pay now isn't as much designed in terms of the monthly bill you're going to pay as it is in what you have as the deductible. So the $500 deductible, $1,000 deductible, they're going by the way, you know, it's a $2,000 deductible or a $3,000 deductible. Now as the individual, and a lot of people don't want to be responsible, but when you have to go in and pay the big bill the first time, and you knew you could have stopped it, okay, the second time around you begin to think, do I really have that $3,000 to pay or that $2,000 to take out of my budget that's going down at this stage of the game to pay that bill? No, you don't actually. So we're in the process of making a dramatic change, and for different reasons, okay? Because there's different models out there. Rashika, I happen to know him fairly well. He's quite the character.
It is, yes, I know.
And his belief is that you can care for people in a different way to make them feel good, including doing their nails when they were home sick in order to get this very overweight woman to do what they expected her to do. And I'm not fooling with you. I mean, they actually went in and established a relationship, and she needed her nails painted. She couldn't reach her feet, so they painted her nails, and she felt really better, and she started doing things they wanted her to do. That sounds really stupid. But believe me, it's a human relationship that he's trying to build that's very different. And he has a lot of people in there that don't have a medical background.
I agree with almost everything you said, but Cal introduced me earlier to someone as the rabble rouser, and I am, and I would tell you the food industry doesn't help the overweight problem. So I think there's a lot of issues in the US. And so I see patients with $6,000 deductibles and lymph nodes in their neck that could be cancer that they can't afford to take out. It's a really hard question, but I do think care has to be delivered differently than the way it is now, and received differently. It's just hard because there's not the one right answer, like to your point earlier about the system change. I might be out of time, so I know you two have had your hand up, and then we'll start.
Just a comment about not confusing technology with system thinking. The power of system thinking is actually that we can input variables and soft variables like behavior. This is what's missing. It's a big part of it, but it's part of it, but it can. It's like this Dan Ariely who wrote Predictably Irrational. I mean, people are often predictably irrational.
Yeah.
And this is what is not taken into account, starting probably, I'm not a doctor, I'm an engineer, but starting probably with medical school. And I'm sure it's changing. I'm sure that God, the diva of surgery, who is today 80 years old, now it's not the same behavior. So what you brought up is part of what can be modeled in a system thinking way, because we know at least it can be modeled, put in a scenario. It's one of the scenarios is that this lady might very well feel much more appreciated and therefore put the effort for change. So it's not impossible, it's just that people didn't think about that before. What I'm afraid of is people confuse that with just technology. It's not just technology. It's the two together.
Technology is just a tool for where you're trying to do. Yes, last question.
I have a question about, you mentioned how about doctor-physician adoption, and I've been in.
It's like really hard.
Yeah, I've been in countless meetings where we'll hear a pitch, we'll do due diligence, and someone in the group say, we'll see an ENT company, and they'll come with an ENT product, and the ENT will be in the group saying, well, I would never use that. None of my colleagues would ever adopt it. How do you? And it just sucks the air out of the room, and we just don't. And we usually don't pass. I think you might have answered my question though. Is that really so prevalent? I mean,
yes.
Are doctors really that hard to change?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, I'll be honest, when I came to Sloan, I had that view, and it's true. It's really hard for doctors and nurses and care providers, especially physicians, for us to change our perspective. But when I left Sloan and I went back to the hospital like a day or two a week, I also have come to realize it's because they live in this world where the risks of making a cell phone are not the same as a risk of a patient dying on the table. We are so risk averse, and we are trained that way through medical school, and no offense to our lovely attorney colleagues, fear of litigation in this country, because I trained in Pennsylvania. Rule number 1 of your residency training was don't get sued. Rule number 2 was take care of, literally, because that malpractice is so high. So the problem is when you start with that fear mentality and that risk aversion, how do you then say, hey, let's do a beta version of this surgical tool, and as long as it works, we just don't even know how to do that. And I think it's good to have outside perspective, like engineers coming in and looking at our problems.
Alright, so that creates.
I don't know, it just depends on, I guess, which doctors, but I would say, yeah, we're very
I've
risk
seen it a
averse.
lot. It really just is so bad for the room.
It's also, you brought up East Coast versus West Coast. I would say I trained in Pennsylvania and in Oregon. I would say the East Coast is by far, Boston is the most conservative medical climate there is, hands down, in this country, period. So probably go somewhere else to get some advice.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much.
So Steve, why don't you sit here and Ayesha sits with you and we can ask some questions that would go together. Yes. You can choose which one. Then.
Cal, yes.
wanna be cool. I think it's a marketing stunt. When you go talk to them to do business, they make it so hard. We try to do that for 2 years now.
So from Hacking Medicine's perspective, we thought it'd be really, so for me, right, I came in as a doctor at a saloon and I thought, oh, I wanted to go to a place where no one else in my class was in healthcare. That's, like, I didn't want to get a master's in public health where I was in school with people that said, you're doing a great job, and I said, yeah, you're doing a great job, and I felt like we were reinforcing each other. So I liked Hacking Medicine because I thought, oh, it's cool, there's an engineer, there's a designer, and there's a clinician. It doesn't mean you have to hack everything in healthcare, but it's a place to start. What's happened from that is a lot of the hospitals have taken on these innovation zones, like particularly in Boston. But the reality from our perspective is they're not innovating with each other. They're innovating with themselves. And as far as I'm concerned, for me, and I'm a very outline thinker in this, innovating with yourself is like not really innovative at all. I mean, you can get somewhere. You're going to do high quality research. You're going to bring together people from like cardiology, radiology, and ER. But it would be really great. And that's why we went away from having a bunch of hospital events to just bringing it back to MIT because we thought it's neutral territory, and then everyone has to like leave their physical entity and walk over somewhere where like they're not as comfortable and it's not their. But I would agree with you. It's tough. I don't know. For those of you that have invested in hospitals, it's hard. Yes.
All right, so I remember how you spoke in the beginning that surgeons are trained to be surgeons and they always think about this one career, one
Yes.
day. Yeah, so I work on somebody's portfolio right now who's a surgeon, and he devised a technique to suture something, and he's the person who devised the first one, the second one, the third one, and the fourth one, and the fifth one. So I think that in a way he's kind of taking over the whole market. Like, there's nobody else in the field. Everybody uses that. He has the whole market share. So, what do you do? I mean, he's improvising on his own techniques, right?
I mean, it depends on who it is, right? If somebody does heart surgery, like somebody showed me a tool last year, like a heart surgery tool for babies. There's only like 7 people in the country that do these particular, so depending on who does these and does these well, I don't know how many other people would think about something like that. Cool, but I think it would be really interesting to bring, I'm just pointing to an engineer, but I think it would be really interesting to bring someone in who watches the process and says, wow, you don't have to do that like with 4 steps, you can do it in 1 if you use different mechanisms. I don't know, that's not easy engagement to disclose. I'm gonna have you guys ask him patent questions, yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry, just one question. I'm interested in your personal perspective. As a physician, you embrace innovation, you embrace technology for better outcomes and so forth. At the same time, you're being potentially inundated with innovation demands or expectations. And also care coordination is another mandate that physicians are responsible for, if not just being part of the continuum and the team, but in many cases driving that care coordination. I'm interested in your perspective about physicians of your generation in their picture of the awesomeness of the responsibility that they see being placed on their shoulders because of this.
Okay, well, I'm not going to speak for the whole generation, but I think if you look up recent articles, physicians of my generation don't find medicine to be awesome at all, particularly in surgical specialties, particularly in Boston. Just look at the percentage of medical school grads that actually practice medicine. And so by giving physicians everything from like doing the surgery well to figuring out what rehab they're going to figuring out the ICD-10 nightmare filling codes, to figuring out, they're leaving medicine. And the really deep, dark secret is that few patients realize how few neurosurgeons and OBGYNs and orthopedists we're now training, and the caliber of getting into and choosing medical careers as a specialty, and the fact that most of us that are physicians would not recommend it to our kids is really telling. And I think that people need to hear that message loud and clear, because I think at the end of the day, everyone says what they say, but like if I have a heart valve problem, I want the best like cardiac surgeon, but in certain states, there are no neurosurgeons within like 300 miles of a city. I just think people forget that part, because I think prevention is important, but we need to like geographically think about what, when you get really sick, like who's going to take care of you. That's a thing that only physicians talk about. Physicians, I think it's coming out in the New Yorker and like in the New York Times.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
This is just a slight legal side
Yeah.
about the generation. Most lawyers are the same way. However, patent lawyers are a little subset. If people like, I like to say to people, if you love technology and you love to see the application, how it helps the world, you're gonna love being a patent lawyer. Because you'll sit down with leaders of the field, Nobel Prize winners sometimes, one-on-one teaching you something that you think is cool. And they're paying you. So we actually have probably a highest percentage of all legal fields of overall job satisfaction. And I've seen versus the rest of like the medical malpractice lawyers and divorce lawyers, all that stuff.
Yes.
You pick
I was just gonna make a comment. I was actually, I'm a designer now, but I actually was originally attending med school. I was taking MCATs and stuff. And I was working for a healthcare startup for a while, and worked at a hospital for a little bit. And through those experiences and meeting other MDs and stuff, it just made me not want to go anymore.
No, that's bad, right? Yeah.
It's just, it's like a combination of the system and then just how some doctors' hands are so tied. You know, I've seen like
I don't drive the care coordination machine because I don't control the dollar flow or the patient. I actually had a family physician like with the ACO model call the other day and say, why did you send this particular patient to BU because that's out of your network? And I said, oh, because that's where like the best skull-based surgeon for this cancer, like this one gentleman should do his surgery. It's like the only chance this guy's gonna live. Like, and you know, they were mans, and I was like, wow, I've never had such a call before. But this must be the first of many calls because everyone's looking, right, to stay in your network. But just because you're in the network doesn't mean you don't have the same skill set. I said I would have done it, but I think this person does it better. So it's really, those are interesting.
Building on the question what Cal asked, it's so hard to do business with hospitals. So what does it take to change the perspective of physicians, of care providers, to go, let's say, when we talk about digital healthcare space, people, these providers going online and providing online care, which is not the case right now. And a lot of states do not have this law, especially Mass, for example. In Mass, we talk about best healthcare. So,
so first of all, I have no answer to how to work with hospitals. I don't know if anyone else has an answer, if they've invested.
We basically don't work
Because-
with startups.
Because physicians are not hospitals, and physicians don't control dollar flow hospitals at all. So those two are really different. I think changing physician mindset, like anything else, is like following money. I think until the financial paradigms around the way care is delivered doesn't change, I think that if you start rewarding physicians for keeping people home and not bringing them in versus kind of giving them, financially rewarding them for throughput through a hospital, which is what happens in all hospitals right now until the ACO model or whatever takes effect. I think that'll be the way, right? I think if you get paid for providing the training to come in, you get paid for the countless hours you spend on the phone, which right now you don't get paid for, to try to keep them at home. That would be really helpful. But we don't have that. We get paid for when people come in to clinic. And so that's what you're still incentivized to do.
thank you.
Yeah, feel free to cut us off.
I tried to get a pilot at MGH, and they said they want 50% of IP. Oh, they're so big. And I was like, I'm done to do business with MGH, but my technology is not. Hell no, I'm not going to give anything because they didn't do anything. So how do you negotiate a partnership with someone who's much bigger?
It's the same old problem you're gonna have anytime someone has more power at the negotiating table than you can. You can walk away and find a decent say, when people come up to you and say, I have a standard form to sign, there's no such thing as a standard form. Nothing, except here, when I signed my mortgage, there's no way, if I change one word, they're gonna do that. But really, 95% of all forms are not. Feel free to try to change them, working with universities or whatever. You have a question?
I have kind of a few different ones. So we've talked a little bit about big data, and there's devices. I see you have a job on, and we're just capturing them. Has there been any coordinated effort to say, okay, here is the big problem. This is the type of data we need, and then get people from all the variety of specialties, so like you're taking engineers, clinicians, et cetera, say, okay, how are we going to best harness this? I know we have these systems, but they're small instances, and it doesn't seem like there's any big motivation outside of those.
I would say Google, Samsung, I don't know, those are, I think the fact that they're all collecting data and bringing knowledge. I mean, I think it might take some, you need such a wide swath of money and influence. So not that I know of that's been meaningfully done, but I think lots of people are leaning into what the outcomes, which can be.
And then to follow up with you, had mentioned that a lot of students going to medical school aren't actually practicing.
Like a growing percentage.
Is that a fear around the medical school community? Is that something that people are respectful about? Do we want to give people this formal education? So maybe as an engineer, I can go to an engineer and still work in kind of the area I just described. Or is our focus now to say we need good physicians?
I think the focus of the medical school is we need good physicians. I think the fear is, why aren't these people excited to practice medicine? That's really the question, right? And I think like people like Atul Gawande write a lot of articles about what the nature of medicine is really like. I think Jonathan Bush's book from Athena Health is actually really interesting. I actually read it recently. I would read that. And when you read it, it's slightly horrifying as you're reading it. You're like, oh, this is terrible. But it's all true. The entire depiction of the healthcare experience was like, oh, this happened to me. Yep, this happened. You know, just the way an ambulance works, the way an ER works, the way a patient works. So I don't have a good answer. I don't think it's economically sound to ask people to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to make them better able to work with engineers, right? So do we need to do that? Do we need to train medical students and physicians, often taxpayer money, so that we don't practice? On the other hand, I might not be practicing in 2 years, right? So like at the end of the day, it's kind of like, why are we so beleaguered? And that's the message that, like, for me as a physician is really interesting. I think people just don't understand how most physicians are like, yeah, I'm done. As soon as I can get out of this, do something else, I'm out. So then who's gonna provide care? I mean, I don't know the answers to these questions, but I think the US, more than anywhere else, has this high rate of dissatisfaction that you don't see often in the rest of the world. Should we keep going or should we stop? Maybe we could do it.
I have a-
10 more minutes.
Okay.
All right.
I have a quick comment on that and a question. One of my first cousins is a facial plastic surgeon, and he retired at age 50. He had enough money. He said he got sick of getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and then everybody was trying to bring a lawsuit to get workers' comp. So now he's restoring a farm in Virginia to its normal grass, and he does 2 months of pro bono work in Africa, and some pro bono work for Americans. But that saddens me. So in terms of the hackathons, and I actually did my second nose surgery. I had a bashed nose, so he worked on it. In terms of intellectual property, when all these hackathons are popping up at hospitals, and Dr. Cal was just mentioning how they want 50-50, who owns the intellectual property? And have there been cases where somebody develops some intellectual property or a company, and how does that work? Who scales? Who benefits?
Well, the owner of a patent is the inventor by law. However, to get into these hackathons, you gotta follow the rules that they have. So I'd imagine that
No rules.
no rules?
It's horrifying from an IP, like from your standpoint as an IP attorney. example, GE Healthcare is sponsoring the track.
Yeah.
Believe me, their attorneys use a lot of people, what are the affordable rules? And
Yeah.
I mean, like all other hackathons, they're like, well, disclose what you want to, and I don't know what that means, right? It's just like the software space, it's really.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you invent it, then if you're the only inventor, and that's it, you're.
But if you sign over the rights to participate in the hackathon, say the MBA, then.
That's the rules then.
Yeah.
You have to sign up and there are rules to sign up with 50%, then they own it, but unless you agree to that, then it's yours.
So what are you seeing at MIT, hackathons, at least, here at Yale?
So,
for
so
hackathon?
far, none of the, like the Yale one this past weekend, didn't have any NDAs or IP or any such rules, but those conversations came up. Some of the hospitals in Boston are considering, if you're gonna come in to our hackathon, you're gonna they use the word co-develop. All those good things she said over there, like, oh, we can do it with you, it's gonna be great, and so a lot of engineers, let's say from MIT or VU, walk away, because I don't know that I wanna share 50% with you. I mean, I think MIT has a long culture of hacking, right, around creating clever solutions, so none of ours have any IP that's assigned. But these are great questions. A lot of companies wanna do these internal innovation events internally, so that they can manage their IP. But I think it's the same space as the software space, because it's entirely confusing when people come, like let's say you work at Blue Cross, you work at Mass General, and you come to this event and you develop something, who owns that? I don't have an answer.
There's a gray area too, which is not hackathons with these developer challenges, and those will have variable sort of signing over of IP. For example, SureScripts, who's the big prescription data aggregator, held one that had a bunch of criteria around an application for using their data streams. And you had to open source it. So you got a little money and then you had to give it away. And that was built into it. And so we looked at it because it's like, well, check, we're shooing. But this is our IP and this is what we're commercializing. So no, because it would just be stupid for us to do that. Plus we're already a certified partner of theirs anyway. So it'd be like taking a gun and shooting ourselves in the head. So, I mean, these developers' challenges, which are often being run by companies, all scripts ran too. I'm sure Scripts has run one, and more of these are being corporately subsidized. That's a read your fine print. And the thing is, there's no one answer to your original question. Hackathons, developers, challenges, accelerator programs. As you said, New York Digital Health Accelerator Program, we went through that. That was very, very good. That was generous. That was a straight ahead venture, equity, it was clean, they didn't want to screw you up. And then you piloted people like your Presbyterian or Shoreline Jewish Health System, but they didn't get a look through that. They just got as much look through as any pilot they would do, but not to the IP. So, I mean, there's so many different structures. Each, you've seen one, you've seen one.
Another concern you have to think about with the IP is if you develop something in a hackathon and you don't protect it and it's sort of out there at this point, in many countries you actually won't be able to patent because it's considered public disclosure a day after it's in the public domain. And so that's another big risk. There's a big problem with this. I don't know if anybody knows about the agile programming environment, and where people will start they'll go to a store, for example, like the Gap, and they'll try to develop an app that works with the customers want to help them select the right size of clothing. But they don't really know what the customers want. They'll actually set up a whole set of workstations, a whole bunch of programmers, and they'll talk to customers. What do you want? And they'll just put it together as they go.
Like the lean startup, the minimal viable product, customer feedback, customer development. Right.
Yeah, and it just goes on, and that's a real problem. And I'm actually going to Huntsville, Alabama tomorrow to deal with that problem with a client.
So, but what happens? What's the end of that? Like, so they set up the table and they think they don't need it.
Usually you have a problem and you find a solution. They come to the game, they don't even know what the problems are that they're solving. So it's a completely reversed situation. So they don't even, and so you don't have a patent lawyer sitting there next to them and writing everything down either. So it's a big problem, and we're wrestling with it with a lot of our software clients, whether it's in healthcare or not.
Why is it difficult from getting
Because we're actually developing product and saying, oh, what do you think? Try this out, and people are signing NDAs in the gap. They're just trying it out, and they're walking away, and they'll say, hey, guess what I did? And so it's in the public domain. So it's risky, yeah. And everybody, we're all trying to figure that out. Software creates, the patent statute was written for gears and you know, members and levers. It wasn't written for software and bits and bytes and DNA. And that's part of the problem modern law is having with IP.
I pressed when I said
All right. So I guess we will call and I'm going to post all these slides on the website so everybody can have access to them. The email addresses will be there too. And let's thank our speakers. And it took a lot of effort to make these slides and fill up the evaluation forms.
Owner of a patent is the inventor by law. However, to get into these hackathons, you got to follow the rules that they have. So I'd imagine that. No rules?
It's horrifying from an IP, like from your standpoint as an IP attorney. Like for example, GE Healthcare is sponsoring the track.
Yeah.
Believe me, their attorneys spend a lot of time around what are the reportable rules? And, I mean, like all other hackathons are like, well, you know, disclose what you want to, and I don't know what that means, right? It's just like the software thing. It's really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you invent it, then if you're the only inventor, and that's it. You are.
But if you sign over the rights to participate in the hackathon, say the MBA, then they
That's the rules.
essentially-
That's the rules then.
Yeah.
You have to sign up, and there are rules to sign up with 50%, then they own it. But unless you agree to that, then it's yours.
So what are you seeing at MIT, hackathons, at least here at Yale?
So far, none of the, like the Yale one this past weekend, didn't have any NDAs or IP or any such rules, but those conversations came up. Some of the hospitals in Boston are considering, if you're gonna come in to our hackathon, you're gonna they use the word co-develop. All those good things she said over there, like, oh, we can do it with you, it's gonna be great, and you know, so a lot of engineers, let's say from MIT or VU, walk away, because you know, I don't know that I wanna share 50% with you. I mean, I think MIT has a long culture of hacking, right, around creating clever solutions. So none of ours have any IP that's assigned. But these are great questions. A lot of companies want to do these internal innovation events internally so that they can manage their IP. But I think it's the same space as the software space, because it's entirely confusing when people come, like let's say you work at Blue Cross, you work at Mass General, and you come to this event and you develop something. Who owns that? I don't have an answer.
There's a gray area too, which is not hackathons, but these developer challenges. And those will have variable sort of signing over of IP. For example, SureScripts, who's the big prescription data aggregator, held one that had a bunch of criteria around an application for using their data streams. And you had to open source it. So you got a little money, and then you had to give it away. And that was built into it. And so we looked at it because it's like, well, check, we're shooing. But this is our IP, and this is what we're commercializing, so no. Because it would be stupid for us to do that. Plus, we're already a certified partner of theirs anyway. So it'd be like taking a gun and shooting ourselves in the head. So, I mean, these developers challenges, which are often being run by companies, Allscripts ran two, SureScripts is run one, and more of these are being corporately subsidized. That's a read your fine print. And the thing is, there's no one answer to your original question. Hackathons, developers, challenges, accelerator programs. You know, as you said, New York Digital Health Accelerator Program, we went through that. That was very, very good. That was generous. That was a straight ahead venture, equity. It was clean. They didn't want to screw you up. And then you piloted people like New York Presbyterian or Shoreline Islanders Health System, but they didn't get a look through that. They just got as much look through as any pilot they would do, but not to the IP. So, I mean, there's so many different structures. Each, you know, you've seen one, you've seen one.
Another concern you have to think about with the IP is if you develop something in a hackathon and you don't protect it and it's sort of out there at this point, in many countries, you actually won't be able to patent because it's considered public disclosure a day after it's in the public domain. And so that's another big risk. There's a big problem with this. I don't know if anybody knows about the agile programming environment, and where people will start they'll go to a store, for example, like the Gap, and they'll try to develop an app that works with the customers want to help them select the right size of clothing. But they don't really know what the customers want. They'll actually set up a whole set of workstations, a whole bunch of programmers, and they'll talk to customers. What do you want? They'll just put it together as they go. You know?
Like the lean startup, the minimal viable
Yeah.
product, customer feedback, customer development, right?
Yeah, and it just goes on, and that's a real problem. And I'm actually going to Huntsville, Alabama tomorrow to deal with that problem with a client. And
So, but what happens? What's the end of that? Like, so they set up the table and they think they don't need it.
Usually you have a problem and you find a solution. They come to the game, they don't even know what the problems are that they're solving. So it's a completely reversed situation. So they don't even, and so you don't have a patent lawyer sitting there next to them and writing everything down either. So it's a big problem, and we're wrestling with a lot of our software clients, whether it's in healthcare or not.
Why is it difficult from getting
The owner of a patent is the inventor by law. However, to get into these hackathons, you gotta follow the rules that they have. So I'd imagine that no rules?
It's horrifying from an IP, like from your standpoint as an IP attorney. Like, for example, GE Healthcare is sponsoring the track.
Yeah.
Believe me, their attorneys use a lot of rules. What are the affordable rules? And, I mean, like all other hackathons are like, well, disclose what you want to, and I don't know what that means, right? It's just like the software thing. It's really.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you invent it, then if you're the only inventor, and that's it, you are.
But if you sign over the rights to participate in the hackathon, say the MBA, then they
That's the rules,
eventually-
that's the rules then.
Yeah.
You have to sign up, and there are rules to sign up with 50%, then they own it, but unless you agree to that, then it's yours.
So what are you seeing at MIT hackathons, at least here at Yale? for
So
hackathons?
far, none of the, like the Yale one this past weekend, we didn't have any NDAs or IP or any such rules, but those conversations came up. Some of the hospitals in Boston are considering, if you're gonna come in to our hackathon, you're gonna they use the word co-develop. All those good things she said over there, like, oh, we're gonna do it with you, it's gonna be great, and, so a lot of engineers, let's say from MIT or VU, walk away, because, I don't know that I wanna share 50% with you. I mean, I think MIT has a long culture of hacking, right, around creating clever solutions, so none of ours have any IP that's assigned. But these are great questions. A lot of companies wanna do these internal innovation events internally so that they can manage their IP. But I think it's the same space as the software space, because it's entirely confusing when people come, like let's say you work at Blue Cross, you work at Mass General, and you come to this event and you develop something, who owns that? I don't have an answer.
There's a gray area too, which is not hackathons, but these developer challenges. And those will have variable sort of signing over of IP. For example, SureScripts, who's the big prescription data aggregator, held one that had a bunch of criteria around an application for using their data streams. And you had to open source it. So you got a little money, and then you had to give it away. And that was built into it. And so we looked at it because it's like, well, check, we're issuing. But this is our IP, and this is what we're commercializing, so no. Because it would just be stupid for us to do that. Plus, we're already a certified partner of theirs anyway. So it would be like taking a gun and shooting ourselves in the head. So, I mean, these developers challenges, which are often being run by companies, Allscripts ran two, SureScripts has run one, and more of these are being corporately subsidized. That's a read your fine print. And the thing is, there's no one answer to your original question. Hackathons, developers, challenges, accelerator programs. As you said, New York Digital Health Accelerator Program, we went through that. That was very, very good. That was generous. That was a straight ahead venture, equity, it was clean. They didn't want to screw you up. And then you piloted people like New York Presbyterian or Shoreline on the Jewish Health System, but they didn't get a look through that. They just got as much look through as any pilot they would do, but not to the IP. So, I mean, there's so many different structures, each, you know, you've seen one, you've seen one.
Another concern you have to think about with the IP is if you develop something in a hackathon and you don't protect it and it's sort of out there at this point, in many countries you actually won't be able to protect because it's considered public disclosure a day after it's in the public domain. And so that's another big risk. There's a big problem with this. I don't know if anybody knows about the agile programming environment, and where people will start they'll go to a store, for example, like the Gap, and they'll try to develop an app that works with the customers want to help them select the right size of clothing. But they don't really know what the customers want. They'll actually set up a whole set of workstations, a whole bunch of programmers, and they'll talk to customers. What do you want? They'll just put it together as they go. You know?
Like the Lean Startup, the Memo Bible
Yeah.
project, you know, customer feedback, customer development project.
Yeah, and it just goes on, and that's a real problem. And I'm actually going to Huntsville, Alabama tomorrow to deal with that problem with a client. And
So, but what happens? I mean, what's the end of that? Like, so they set up the table and
You're right away.
they think they don't need it.
Usually you have a problem and you find a solution. They come to the game, they don't even know what the problems are that they're solving. So it's a completely reversed situation. So they don't even, and so you don't have a patent lawyer sitting there next to them and writing everything down either. So it's a big problem, and we're wrestling with it with a lot of our software clients, whether it's in healthcare or not.
Why is it difficult in getting customers